Hey there. So I'm just going to come straight out and say it seems that I am in a world of pain when it comes to technology today. And the irony is not lost on me given the subject that we are in. But I'm actually traveling, and for whatever reason, I'm just having great difficulty showing you both PowerPoint and talking to you at the same time. It's just not working. And look, I don't. I don't love PowerPoint anyway, so I'm just going to talk to you and I'll follow up with some slides later with any luck. So, the first thing I want to talk to you about today is legal personality. A significant part of the chapter that you've been asked to read from Legg and Bell sits on the premise that AI doesn't have and can't have legal personality. And well, part of this is me being contrary, part of it is you being lawyers wanting to explore every side of the argument. I want to acknowledge that they've got some really good arguments as to why that is not the case now, but I think that there probably is some really good reasoning for thinking that it's not impossible that going forward AI may in fact have some kind of legal personality. So before we actually get into the reasons why I think that might be the case and the alternative arguments for why it should not be the case, let's ask ourselves, why does it matter whether AI has legal personality or not? So in the context of what we're talking about lawyers using artificial intelligence, presumably narrow forms of artificial intelligence, some kind of decision tree or artificial intelligence that's trained in particular areas. And so the question becomes, if lawyers are using these tools to perform legal services and something goes wrong, who takes responsibility for that? Does the coder take responsibility? Does the lawyer who is using it take responsibility? Can the AI have responsibility itself? Now, when we're talking about like really sophisticated artificial intelligence, moving towards general artificial intelligence, we can think about things like autonomous driving cars, self-driving cars. And there's already been a significant amount of discussion and litigation around who is responsible in the event that a self-driving car has an accident. And for those of you who follow that, you'll see to a certain extent the consequences, the answer to that question is a consequence of the contract that the autonomous automobile provider has with the drivers or the users of that service, with marketing and PR, the decisions that the owners of that technology have made in relation to what the consequences should be. Sorry, I realised I said marketing and PR, and that could be kind of unkind, actually. We could think about it in terms of the ethical stance that the coders behind or the owners behind those machines took. It is a question that's sort of still out for consideration. I think the leaders in this space is the European Union. I think that's well acknowledged. And this all comes down to this question of what kind of ethical framework should artificial intelligence sit within. So if we're thinking about the kinds of work that could be done by lawyers or could be replaced by artificial intelligence that is currently done by lawyers, the question becomes, how bespoke is that work? Is it algorithmic? Is it just working through a decision tree to come up with some numbers that ultimately inform a decision that's being made? Or is it nuanced and strategic and based on years of experience that can't be unbundled or decomposed, to use Richard Susskind's words, into individual steps? I'm going to give you a link to a podcast, a fabulous podcast if you're interested in this subject, called what is it called? It's the Future Law podcast. And they spend a lot of time looking at a range of different business models and technologies that are impacting the way that we work as lawyers. And the particular episode that I want to highlight for you today is basically, I don't know if you call it a debate. It was more like a panel discussion between two participants at the Singapore Future Law Festival that was held in 2021 but was actually online. And the host of the Future Law podcast, a professor out of Pittsburgh University in the USA, basically really asked a judge from Michigan, from memory, and a court administrator and head of innovation in the Singapore court system to really look at the differences or the circumstances in which they could see artificial intelligence replacing judges. Now, what's really interesting to me about that podcast is the way the two of them have very similar views for most of the way through, but very different conclusions. How human is that, right? They come up with really very different ideas about what could or could not be replaced by artificial intelligence in a judging sense. Now, look, again, I'm not a litigator. I don't have a strong opinion in this regard, but I do have strong opinions in relation to the way that artificial intelligence and other technologies could be used in the practice of transactional law. And I'm very aware that one of the reasons why our clients come to us as transactional lawyers is because they want the insurance policy. They want to know that when they enter into a contract with another party, that contract will be binding. Now, it may well be that over time circumstances change, and actually what the parties do differs and veers very much away from the contract that they drafted. I am not naive enough to think that everything that I put into a contract actually happens. But what I do know is that when the parties stop getting along, when the parties start to fight with each other, that's when the contract becomes very important. That's when the parties will go back to the document that they wrote and see what it says about the dispute that they're having, or what the payment should be, and when and how should it be made, and whether time is of the essence or not, and whether any of the terms are defined and if they're used consistently. And so one of the reasons that we do that is so that when things don't work out, so that the parties can turn back to their lawyers and look to them for compensation in some cases. And so who becomes responsible when we use artificial intelligence and when we use that to draft contracts or to make decisions? Now, this is a big question, and it has been really troubling academics a great deal, but it's also a very small question and an easy question in some ways, I think. If we go back to this theme that we keep coming back to, is what are we talking about here? Are we talking about the tool, or are we talking about the job that we need to get done with the tool? My view is that over time, what we see to be legal work will continue to shrink and become more and more specialized. Things that we do now with a word processor were things that we used to do with a typewriter, and before that we did them by hand. The tools that we have to do our work effectively will continue to improve, to add speed and to reduce cost, but they will require changes to the way that we work. And that itself can be unnerving, and it can also be expensive to change. So as we see these disruptive tools come in, different things that we can do, or different tools that we can use in order to do our job, we as lawyers will need to continually ask ourselves the question, is this the right tool? And do I, as a competent lawyer, need to master its use? And that's something I'm going to talk about in the next iteration. So with all that in mind, let's come back to the question of, can AI have legal personality? Now, when you watch the movies, legal personality seems to be all about the personality, doesn't it? We've all seen movies or read books where some kind of robot becomes a sentient being, and its personality gives it rights, and the nub of the story, the ethical, if you will, conundrum comes out of this being not being something that we can separate out from being human. And you could, I could list off movies, but most of them would show my age, whether it's from Blade Runner to Gattaca to iRobot and more. But we're not in the world of movies, are we? We're lawyers. And so when we think about legal personality of a company, for example, that's got nothing to do with personality. Sure, a company can have a culture. It can have branding, it can have a vision, it can even subscribe to different systems that means that it's always going to comply with ethical obligations. But its legal personality actually refers to its ability to and its rights to sue and be sued in its own name. And I guess to develop intellectual property itself through the humans or potentially other beings that it employs for that purpose. So what do I mean by that? We know that a company is something that has limited liability. What does that mean? It means the owners of the company, their liability is limited to their paid up capital. If a company stuffs up, sure, the people who drive the company, for want of a better expression, the directors, they have personal liabilities and special duties in relation to the way that they make decisions for that company. I don't find it very difficult to imagine a world where an AI could have similar kind of legal personality, and the owners and the coders of that AI could also have limited liability as well, that their liability could be limited in relation to the nature of the coding. Now, a lot of work's been done in this space, like often when we talk about this, we start with Isaac Asimov and his 3 rules of robotics, which sound very sensible, but at the end of the day, the pathos, right, the drama of all of his now somewhat ancient science fiction novels come out of the interplay between those 3 rules of robotics. I'll make sure that they're available on a slide so that you can see them, but in a nutshell, they really go to this hierarchy where robots need to do what humans say, unless that would cause a harm to the human or to the robot. They can't do anything that will harm a human, and they can't do anything that harms themselves unless doing those things would contradict with the other rules. A whole lot of thought's been given in recent times to the principles of robotics, and in particular work that's come out of the UK, but let's face it, Australia also has turned its mind to this, and probably do you call it a country? The body that is leading the way here is the European Union, which itself has developed through a group of 52 experts, 7 principles of robotics. Human agency and oversight being a requirement, technical robustness and safety, privacy and data governance, which is going to be a subject of a subsequent chat here. Transparency in relation to decision making, something we've spoken about quite a bit. Diversity, non-discrimination and fairness, societal and environmental well-being, and lastly, accountability. Now, I'll make sure that you've got links to all of that material. But I think it is, as Toby Walsh would say, Professor Toby Walsh, who wrote the book Machines Behaving Badly, he says that there is a kind of AI ethics bandwagon going on at the moment. He's got look, and actually let me just quote here. I'm going to take it straight from the text. Bear with me, I don't like reading all these things. So this set of ethical principles, what do you think of them? Artificial intelligence development should promote fairness and justice, protect the rights and interests of stakeholders, and promote equality of opportunity. Sounds good to me. AI development should respect and protect personal privacy and fully protect the individual's right to know and right to choose. AI systems should continuously improve transparency, explainability, reliability, and controllability, and gradually achieve auditability, supervisability, traceability, and trustworthiness. Great, right? Sounds pretty good. Guess who wrote these? The Chinese Ministry of Science and Technology. Yep. Well, the guy is ultimately responsible for TikTok, or so it seems. So, and, well, actually, TikTok, I'm being a little bit unfair here. Those of you who are not aware of it, the social accountability system, the social credit system in China uses AI significantly to track and monitor people. And it's being used in particular to identify Uyghur people and ultimately to send them to what appear to be concentration camps. So it's not hard to conclude that it doesn't really matter what you say, it's what you do. And the question of who is responsible is always going to be a complex one. But I wouldn't discount for all time the potential for AI itself to be responsible and ultimately to have rights in the way that Jacob Turner talks about the right to own or to receive moral rights in relation to intellectual property and other algorithmic solutions that AI ultimately produces. Food for thought? Absolutely. These are complex questions and there is no right answer. I'd be really interested to hear what you think. Cheers.